Welcome to the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast with Darren Mitchell. If you're a sales leader looking to take your leadership to a whole new level, then this is the podcast for you. We'll be exploring tips, techniques, and strategies to help you take your leadership to the exceptional level and allow you to enjoy more money, more meaning, and better sales results. Welcome back to the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast. This is Darren Mitchell. And the reason I'm laughing is my very special guest, Rebecca Gebhardt, all the way from Minnesota. We've just been talking about how a recent podcast, your podcast host didn't actually name themselves. So you thought, okay, how do I pronounce this person's name?
Yeah. So I was like, when are we starting? We're starting. All right.
Oh, we've started now. We've pressed record. So Rebecca, absolute privilege to have you on the podcast. You are a very successful entrepreneur, salesperson, and now in a business called Rise Up Consulting. And you have trademarked the terminology, or I guess, for want of a better term, the phraseology leaderboard to leadership. And this is going to be a fascinating conversation because I think you and I are on the same page when it comes to salespeople making the transition or being anointed into a leadership position and not necessarily be given the transition plan or the necessary blueprint to make it a successful transition. So looking forward to this conversation. And I'm not going to take up all this time because I know you'd love to talk as well. But I am notorious for taking up microphone space. So, hey, just talk over me in the meantime.
I'll talk over you right now. Yes.
So,
no, I'm excited to be here with you, and I think we're gonna have a phenomenal conversation. And this is such a near and dear issue, and something that we have kind of gone all in. It's sort of our niche at Rise Up Consulting is this emerging sales leader and how that first transition into leadership sets up successful sales leadership careers or doesn't, and then sets up leadership bench strength at organizations. And I have heard, and I forget who I heard this from, but it was a saying of, we are best positioned to help the people we once were. And I remember as a 19-year-old starting out, I was in direct sales at the time, leading a team of 3 women, completely stressed out. If I was selling, I needed this. And I think that there's some development we just have to age into. You just need to get where you need to get on your level of consciousness and complexity of thought. But you should also be able to bypass a lot of this with intentional development. And so I know what I needed as I started working with our sales leadership clients. I noticed they all had the same problems. And when I looked around for the data, because I'm really big into the data, not just these gut feelings and these nice slogans that sound good, but what's actually going to move the needle for people, I could find nothing.
Wow.
On emerging sales leaders. The one stat I did see in Everyone Deserves a Great Manager by Scott Miller, he quoted a Harvard Business Review stat. You and I were just talking about this before you hit record. And the Harvard Business Review found that the average age someone gets their first leadership promotion is age 30, but they don't receive their first leadership training until age 42. So that's not sales specific, but that's across the board. And so I went, oh my gosh. Remember putting the book down and going, there's all this status quo, and you and I can talk about that, but there's just, and when I have this conversation with people, like, you're right. We take the top sales. There's something wrong in the system, but everyone just talks about what's wrong. They haven't taken the next step to figure out the solution for it. And so not that we have figured out everything, but we have figured out a lot. And that's what we help our emerging sales leadership clients and corporate clients with.
Rebecca, I just wonder whether, I'm just thinking out loud here, whether the reason a lot of organizations don't have a specific program for that transition is they look at the top performing salespeople, and that's logically where they get their pool of leadership talent from. And they think, well, what else am I going to teach these people? because they're at the top of their game, they're doing great work. All I need to do is give them other people to be responsible for, and hopefully, or maybe through a process of osmosis, those people will be successful as well. So I'm kind of wondering whether it's just a level of ignorance or whether it's like, you know what, we're so focused on the numbers, we just got to keep making sure those fires are continuing to burn. We don't have time to take them off the phones or out of customer meetings, etc., to train them. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's the status quo. It's the way it's always been, but that whirlwind is really real
Mm,
and it is a struggle. It's easy for consultants to be like, look above the trees and take the third, because we have time intentionally in our schedules to be doing that. It is so stressful to be
mm,
a sales leader and a producing sales leader. You are accountable to market share, you're accountable to revenue goals, you're accountable to growth goals, you're accountable to the executive team and the board, and there's just a lot going on. But it's very interesting on why we don't do it, but you're right. It's assumed. We make a lot of assumptions. And knowing how to think critically is a very important skill any leader, not just sales leaders, need to be. But we start there by making a ton of assumptions
mm,
about you're good in sales, you'll be a great leader. And
mm.
there are a lot of great salespeople who are great sales leaders.
Yeah.
We all know people who aren't.
Yes.
Um, and we've all had a story about someone who's been terrible as a sales leader, or they just, those unicorn salespeople, they just want to go make some deals. They just want to crush it. Just let
Yeah.
them run wild. Like
Yeah.
let them do their thing. But in reality, it doesn't come across people's minds because senior leaders didn't get that training either. So when we had done our leaderboard to leadership survey, this is in 2021, because I couldn't find any data. And I saw that Harvard Business Review stat and I was like, what's happening? 80% of sales leaders said they got zero training once being
Wow.
promoted. Zero. And I forget the other numbers. That's the stat I always say. I should probably go back and I don't have all my work memorized. But then a significant follow-up to that was they got one training. And it could have been like a week long, kind of with like a sales school with sales training onboarding. You give them a power week and put them in the field. Um, and so it's kind of like, and I share this in my Leaderboard to Leadership book, which is coming out, but it's an analogy to it was I'm the middle of seven children. And we don't have time to talk about those issues. Okay. Darren, we're not going to get into those today. But um, but all seven of us never took swimming lessons.
Okay.
And my best friend lived two doors down. She had an underground pool, which in Wisconsin was rare because it's frozen most of the year, right? You have to
Mhm.
drain it's not really common. But we learned, and my parents never took swimming lessons either. My mom
Okay.
actually learned how to swim at age 65.
Wow.
So they never learned, it didn't even cross their minds to put us, they actually looked at other people, were like, why are they paying for swimming lessons? Just throw them in the water, they'll figure it out. And that's the same mentality we have, not because my parents are lazy. Part of it was budget reasons for my
Mm,
parents. They could not afford to send seven kids through swimming lessons. And it was time constraints. And those same constraints are what organizations have to deal with. So yeah, a lot of assumptions of what skills are going to transfer into leadership and which
mm.
ones aren't.
Yeah.
And so that's what I do with clients is I try to break that down of, okay, what are you going to bring with you?
Mm.
You can still use that. You worked really hard to develop that skill, like discovery, get to know your team, ask lots of great questions.
Yeah.
This skill over here, just leave that in sales. Don't bring that into leadership. That's not going to work.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. It's an interesting one because I have a similar approach in terms of you use the analogy of swimming, and I often say that sales leaders are thrown to the wolves, and it's almost like go in and we'll see whether it makes them or it breaks them. And unfortunately, in big organizations, it's almost like, well, the resources, the people are almost expendable. So if it doesn't work, then we'll just replace it with somebody else. And because we don't have time to train them, we expect them to know because the most important aspect of our business is our revenue, our profitability, our market share, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a shame, but it means that for companies like you and for people like me, there's always opportunities to
there's
continue to
opportunity.
change the narrative.
And I'll say the businesses that feel that way still not a good fit for me.
Yeah.
I don't work with companies like that, and I'm sure you don't either.
No.
But the thing about it is they could get away with that. If you think about just the sheer manpower of the baby boomers and how
Yeah.
many people there were, even Gen X, but you move into millennials and Gen Z, who by 2025 are going to be 27% of the workforce.
Mm.
They may not, some of them, the old Gen Zs are going to be starting maybe in some leadership responsibilities, but we're still mainly talking about millennials being in this emerging,
Yeah.
it's between Gen Z. But we cannot run that, just it's almost like rushing a frat or sorority. That's the way that sales is set up.
Mm.
So those of us who are good, or we figure out how to the rules of engagement to win, the competitive ones, the achievers, you and I are those people, we'll figure it out.
Yeah.
The other ones won't, and that's okay.
Mm.
You can't do that in leadership because fewer and fewer people want to become leaders.
Yeah.
And 53% of executives are not confident in their bench strength of leadership. And you don't scale sales organizations with a bunch of salespeople. You scale sales organizations with great leaders. And
Yes.
so, but I get it. I get the demographics. I get the cultural times, the expectations, but um, just the drop of population and who we have to work with is
Mm.
down. That the people who want to get into leadership, Gen Z cares less. They care about opportunities for growth, and they care about pay, but they don't care about titles.
Yeah.
And so it's so important. It's like we got to do a really good job. So sales leadership development for emerging leaders is not just teaching them the mindset, the habits, the skill sets. It's actually recruiting people and saying, "Hey, let me give you a win. Let's get excited. See who you can be exposed to. Your ideas are going to be discovered. You can live your purpose through being a leader." It's
Mm.
more about that.
Yeah.
Because and organizations that don't see that are going to be left behind.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And maybe this is the status quo conversation we had before, but based on your experience and being in the industry and sort of moving up through the ranks and being a leader from the age of 19, why do you think it is that a lot of organizations, because you gave us the statistics, why do you think that they simply don't put the emphasis on the leadership development that they intuitively probably know they should, but they choose not to? Is it a case of we're just lucky, we'll just continue to ride this wave, or do you think there's something else there? Because it's almost like the exception rather than the rule of an organization that really actively invests in developing bench strength and really putting some leadership development into their people.
Well, I think it's just there's a couple of different reasons. Yes, the status quo. Sometimes it's financial constraints, like companies just don't have the money to
Mm.
put it into use. And so they'll say, if you want to get better at this, you can take it upon yourself to go find yourself a leadership coach.
Yeah.
And there's definitely a space for that, and that is completely appropriate in a lot of situations. It's the whirlwind, like best of intentions, but it's also from the trap we get stuck in with dealing with the numbers right now and not looking strategically at the long-term sustainable profitability of organizations, which always comes from the leaders. And so you get better recruiting, you're able to attract better people, you're able to retain people better, and of course the revenue goes up. But it's just like a plethora, and some people will say, you know what, our organization's doing fine. A lot of businesses, you know it was kind of getting a little fat, you know what I mean? Like profits were easy, sales were easy, we don't see a need for this. But when things get tough, you figure out who those people are. And right now, I'm not sure, what it's like in your end of the world, but there's definitely changes happening, right? It's not so easy to make money. It's not just about raising capital.
Mm.
Investors actually want to see a return on their investment. Go figure.
Wow, who would have thought?
Who would have thought? Who would have thought? But no matter how challenging it gets, there are always these visionary leaders at organizations that go, this is exciting
Mm,
because the people who can't hack it are going to fall. We're going to take over their market share. And those are the leaders that double down on R&D. Those are
yeah.
the leaders that double down on their leadership development.
Mm,
I had a client that this happened to during COVID. They are a face-to-face fundraising company, and COVID shut down everything, right? They work with schools.
yeah.
And I actually share their case study in my next book. And I actually have a video, a YouTube video series about them. I interviewed the two owners, Scott and Todd, but they went from profits are great to, oh my gosh, are we going to have a business?
Yeah. Okay.
And in 2021, they kind of came out of it, and then they doubled down and they said, we need to scale. We COVID made us realize we need great leaders. They
Mm,
do a phenomenal job with sales training. They just didn't invest in their leaders, and they did it, Darren, and they increased 45%. They went from 10 million in revenue. And then, so now 3 years later, they're going to hit 30 million this year.
wow.
And they attribute it. So then they used what I taught them for sales leadership, and they actually put it into leadership in general because we did something different with them. But it's just cool
Yeah.
when good guys are winning and when leaders are focused not just on short-term profits, but the long-term people aspects. And they actually care about the
Mm.
types of people that their employees are becoming.
Well, that's a really interesting point because I mean it's a gross generalization, but there are a lot of organizations out there that talk the talk. They talk about the culture of the organization, the values we have. We put the customer, our people at the center of everything we do. And yet you see their behaviors and you think, wow, there's something that doesn't quite fit here. What's going on? And there's story after story of organizations, whether it be COVID years or the GFC or back in the Depression and all the dips in the economy. You see the organizations that panicked or had a short-term focus were very reactive. And one of the first things they stopped doing was things like marketing, sales, training, development. The companies that said, no, 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 we've got to do something completely different are the ones that ultimately became stronger and ultimately became significantly more profitable. There's got to be something in that, Rebecca.
There is. It's like Jim Collins knew what he was talking about when he wrote Good to Great. It's
You would-
a phenomenal book if any of your listeners haven't read that yet. But yeah, it's counterintuitive.
Mm,
I have a client right now going through budget cuts, right? Like going through some crazy shifts, and they're making some very difficult conversations. They're still keeping leadership development.
mm,
We're changing our engagement a little bit, but they're still keeping it and doubling down because they know that they're committed. And that takes a lot of guts to
does.
do that. That takes a lot to go in front of a board and say, I know you may not see this, but we know that this is what it is really important. But as
Yeah.
I was talking, Darren, this is so 70%. I was just thinking about the connecting leadership development and sales leadership. You need to connect it to
Mm,
performance metrics and outcomes. Otherwise, it's a waste of time. There's like really good training that is just fun for like a month, and then it's like I forgot all about it.
yeah.
Um, because it's not done properly. But 70%, the Association of Talent Development um, had this stat in one of their weekly or monthly magazines, but 70% of organizations base the success of their learning programs based on if participants enjoyed it, not if there's results. So then you go, okay, that's like the billions of dollars that companies spend. If you want to entertain your employees, bring in a band.
Yes. Yes. Bring in a billiard table.
Bring in the foosball tables, it's but there's a lot of consultants that don't know how to connect it to the performance metrics and the goals, and they're easily connectable, but I think you need to connect them.
Mm,
Otherwise, you go, this is really great. I'm so glad I got better at emotional intelligence, or thank you. I'm glad I know how to do a one-on-one. I'm glad I can manage my time better. I'm great.
Mm,
But if they aren't thinking this X, Y, and Z result's going to get better because of it, well, that's not going to improve.
that's
And it's
it.
really hard to go to the board and ask for more investment if you didn't connect those dots.
Totally. And the other part there that as you're talking, I'm thinking there's a lot of organizations that think, well, I'll bring Rebecca in and she'll do a 2 day training or maybe a week's training with the sales leaders, help the sales team, etc. And the business thinks that's the elixir that's going to solve all the issues. So you come in, you do your training. There's no follow-up, there's no embedding program, there's no ongoing coaching and mentoring, there's no ongoing, I guess, expectation placed on the senior leaders to keep these things alive and to keep them being implemented. And then two months down the track, they look back and say, well, the results haven't really changed. That training must have been a failure. So they'll go out and look for something else and they'll repeat the process. Versus it has to be an enabler. And as you rightly say, it's got to be connected to what is this going to help us do in terms of driving results, revenue share, customer satisfaction, whatever the key metrics are of the business, has to be specifically linked to the outcomes of the training. Because otherwise, it's just, as you say, a fun day. And for many people, I'm sure some salespeople and sales leaders who are behind their target think, man, I don't know about you, Johnny, but I got no time for this. And they're in the training, looking at their phone, trying to do deals and not
Uh-huh.
paying attention to the training.
I know. I know. It's like "Roar," it's so crazy. I know that when I started working with corporate sales leadership teams, I was very guilty of the tactical quick solution because I was just excited. It's
Mm,
like, yeah, you need me to do that? I can do that. I can do that training. Like, sure, it's gonna be great. Um, but what really, if you look at the research, you were just talking about like the drip campaigns, like to change people's behaviors,
yeah,
you need to form habits. They need reminders, they need community, they need several. So there's like the best case scenario of how, a sales leadership program could be run. And it doesn't need to be complicated, but they need several things. But the the organization can say we care about our people. See, we have these, we hired this motivational speaker, or we had, Rebecca come in and help out. But if it's and my workshops are phenomenal, right? But they need to commit to doing something.
mm,
Otherwise, I'm just a really expensive band-aid.
that's it.
And I don't want to work with someone that their team can't be successful after I leave.
Yeah. Because that not only is a reflection on the team, but it's also a reflection on you, which is unfair if the people in the team are not prepared to do the things they know they need to do
Uh-huh.
in order to drive the results that they say they want or the company says they need to deliver. It's a
Mm-hmm.
challenge. It's a challenge.
Uh-huh.
So when you look at organizations, and because I want to talk about some of the what you see even today coming out of COVID, some of the key challenges around this transition path, but also some of the opportunities and some of the key, I guess, key principles, particularly for sales leaders or senior executives that are looking at and listening to this now. What are some things that they need to be mindful of to, I guess, make that transition a little bit more smoother, either for themselves if they're thinking about wanting to move into sales leadership, or if they do have responsibility of building a team and expanding a leadership team, how do they do that? So can we first start with some thoughts then on some of the key challenges that are out there? And I know you've sort of alluded to it, the fact that not many organizations spend money on training, and we think, you're a great salesperson, just go and lead the team, and the results will take care of themselves. But are there other key challenges through the work that you do with organizations that have sort of bubbled up to the surface that perhaps you didn't on the surface realize, but through working with organizations they've come to pass?
Yeah. So I will say when you set someone up into leadership, in our research that we found the top three challenges for new sales leaders. It's time management, which
Yep.
makes complete sense, feedback and accountability.
Mm,
And so those wind up into coaching. And so there are some huge opportunities for organizations to help, especially that first level, because for some people make the switch from sales to sales leadership, but a lot of people are in the player coach role. They don't
mm,
give up sales. They still keep their book, right? They just have these added responsibilities. And look at this great opportunity you have to lead. And they should be excited about doing that. But it's different. and thinking about how it's different is really important. So those are the challenges for sales leaders, but organizations have a couple of opportunities with getting very clear on their values and culture and
Hmm.
what they want these leaders to attract, who they want them recruiting, and how they want them coaching people to succeed in that aligns to the vision of the organization. And right now, that's such a big deal because people want to work somewhere where they can do their very best work. They want to contribute towards an organization's vision. They want to be a part of it. Um, Older generations, I just want a paycheck. I want to go home. It's like, I'm sure some of them worked for a purpose. I'm not saying they didn't, but it's so post-COVID, it's so glaring. And if an employee doesn't feel like they can achieve their purpose in life through your organization, which they can, I have never had someone I've coached, I have never not been able to help them
Mm.
find their purpose and be able to achieve that at work. But they don't find it there, then they're going to go work
Yeah.
for themselves or they're going to go find it somewhere else. So that's a huge opportunity for organizations.
Mm.
So the culture, helping sales leaders coach is a really big one too. And then just helping them with their mental health and their I call it energy management. So
Hmm.
when I talk about time management, I weave it in with energy management, and it's one of my most popular workshops and um, one of the most impactful sessions in our whole Leaderboard to Leadership Accelerator because it makes such a difference. But people are not taught. I'm a grandma millennial. I was born in January of 81. I'm the literally oldest millennial you can find. So I'm Grandma M. But a lot of my younger millennial counterparts in Gen Z, their parents bulldozed for them, right? It was like they just kind of got rid of all of so they didn't learn these really crucial, not everyone, but they didn't learn these crucial persistent, they don't have those neural pathways to be able to
Mm.
work through that. And
Mm.
so helping your younger employees and the older employees who just never learned it, how to manage their energy. And I'm talking spiritual energy, which is not religious. It's,
Hmm.
it's, the purpose behind what they do, their emotional energy, which is all about EQ, their
Yeah.
mental energy, being able to focus, and then their physical energy. Do you have what it takes to actually not just survive through a day, but actually bring it?
Yeah.
And when you figure that out, you can manage time a
Mm.
lot easier. You know the power hours to get stuff done, and you can coach others to bring out the best in them.
Because often people think, oh, you've got to be up at 5 o'clock, or you've got to still be hustling and bustling and 11 p.m. at night, and that might work for some, but I guarantee it doesn't work for a lot of others. So just knowing what your own energy cycle looks like in terms of when you're going to be your best is a great way of doing that. Um, Talking about feedback, one of the things that I'm big on is leaders creating an environment where feedback not just becomes expected, it becomes demanded. But it's fascinating in the organizations I go and work in when I talk about this concept of feedback and how the idea of feedback in most of these organizations is, well, you know what, Rebecca, if you and I are not having a conversation, it means you must be doing something well. You're sitting there thinking, really? Is this how it works? Um, just talk to me about the importance of feedback because I think that feeds back into culture. Because if a culture of an organization says we value our people, we value high performance, and then they don't have an ecosystem that supports regular positive but also critical feedback, then they're telling porky pies to use an Australian Australian colloquialism.
I have no idea what that means.
Telling lies. So
Okay, that's a new fun one for me.
yeah.
Yeah, feedback is so freaking critical. Top performers want it. And they really crave it. And so it's what they're doing good and what they're doing bad. It's like these constant feedback loops. And so normalizing, just saying like, hey, we're just going to have a little debrief. We're just going to
Mm.
have a post debrief on that call, on the week, what worked, what didn't. just really simple things to make, because then what that does into your culture is you create a learning culture, you
Mm,
create a failing forward culture, and you understand where how people think of you. I recently got certified. This is not for like a new sales leader, but it's something called the Leadership Circle, and it's worldwide, but it's really for executives, and it's a 360-degree feedback on how leaders are perceived and their strengths. And I
mm,
just went through this with 13 senior leaders at an organization. Darren, it was, people had no idea. Like there's parts of it where you it was like they could rate you, so it was quantitative and then qualitative.
yeah,
And at one point this woman goes, "Is this real life? Like, is this what people think of me?" And we can't be our best if we don't know how we're perceived.
yeah.
And so at basic level, and I'm sure you do this too, it's like, how do you think you're being perceived?
Mm,
How do you want to be perceived? And here's how people actually perceive you. That's where the gold is. I mean, I
mm,
do things where if I do not get feedback from people, it's going to be bad. It's going to be
mm.
really bad. I share some funny stories in my next book about my first time of getting feedback. And of course I, went to all the people on my team who did well, and I was like, great. And the last one's like, you cared more about your sales than mine. And I was
Yeah.
like, last time I do feedback. No, just kidding. But I've had clients also have these terrible experiences where, he was like, how am I doing? 1 to 10. He's like, 1. And so we had to
Wow.
have a 4 hour, but it started this. But if you don't know where you stand, you can't work with it. If you don't know what reality is, you're never going to succeed in reality. And so that might be a long answer to feedback, but I'm very passionate. I have a character flaw where I'm incapable of not telling someone how I feel. Like they need to know exactly where they stand with me. I need to know where I stand with them.
Yeah.
And that's not always easy to do in corporate world. I understand, but it's an issue. I got a problem about it. So.
But is that an issue for you, or is it an issue for people who don't necessarily want to hear the hear that?
It's an issue for all of us because then I just keep digging in and digging in, and they're like, I'm not ready to talk about it yet, Rebecca. I don't have words yet, constructive feedback for you. So
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
can actually swing the pendulum too far with feedback where you're like, you're spending all this time, but it's, people think it takes a lot of time. It just takes a lot of courage in the beginning. And then
Yeah.
it just becomes a habit that's
That's
ingrained
it.
in your team and the culture. And you slowly see everybody getting better. And then it
Yeah.
was like, hey, what do you got for me? What are you noticing? And
Yeah.
feedback is not just from the leader to the salesperson. It's all around, right? It's peers, it's direct reports, and that's
Totally.
super, super helpful.
Totally. And I say to leaders all the time that in order to start to create that culture, you as the leader have to be the instigator of that. And it's not instigating by saying, I'm going to give you feedback, Rebecca. It's a case of you as the leader need to start to seek feedback first, because when you do that, you start to build the muscle. And when you're receiving that feedback with not conditions attached and not getting emotionally involved if something comes back that it's not as what you thought it was going to be, but being grateful for it, what starts to happen is people start to get into a rhythm and start to build the muscle around, oh, Rebecca's continuing to ask feedback. Maybe I can start asking feedback myself. And that's how it starts to permeate. The biggest
What
principle, sorry, go.
I was saying, what you just said though is really important, continuing to ask for feedback, because as a leader, when you initially start asking for feedback, people go, I don't know, you're doing great.
Yeah,
And then you ask them a week later and they go, I don't really have anything for you. And you ask them a week later, like, oh, they're serious about this.
yeah,
I got to come up with something, right?
yeah.
It's that continual, because you know this, right? It's like you'll coach them like, hey, why don't you go implement this? They go, I
Hmm.
didn't work. It was like,
Must
scrap it,
must must be a
Yeah.
bad principle you've just taught me. Didn't work.
Yep.
Teach me something else.
Yep. Ready for the
Um,
next thing. I got my pen out. Yeah, I'm ready for it. Yeah.
that's it. But what I was going to say there is that it's the continual feedback mechanism that's really important. And as part of that and framing it is we've got to make sure that people understand that the purpose and the intention of feedback, it's not to criticize, it's not to condemn, it's not to judge, it is to help you develop. Now, if you come back to what you were talking about before around the training and all the things we do, it has to be linked to definitive outcomes that can be measurable. And so when feedback is then provided, it's now linked and it probably has more meaning, and they're more likely now to start to either implement the feedback that's been given or be more open to now providing feedback because it's now going to be more meaningful.
Yep. Yeah. It's these are data points, and you can so as a leader, you can just, you can track it, you can be having these conversations, but organizationally you can track these data points, and
Mm,
you wouldn't be able to do this well, maybe you could, I don't know, but you can be, this is what performance reviews are for. These are what quarterly business reviews are for. You can track these things and you can see the progress. And when people can see that they're winning, they just get more motivated and they get better.
yeah.
And so making sure that the feedback is constructive, but you're also focused on, you improved, like
Yeah.
noticing the little details in their numbers or how they showed up or
Yeah.
whatever, that is super, super important.
Mm. Which brings me to accountability. Now, as you're talking there, I know from personal experience a number of, and I say leaders in inverted commas, right? Because you don't necessarily allocate the word leaders to these type of people, but they're so focused on the number. And every conversation we have is in relation to the number that's been set. And if there's a big gap in that number, then all of a sudden it's, hey, what are you going to do? What are you going to do to close the gap, right? Not what can I do to help you? So when it comes to accountability, how do we drive this as a leader so that we know that we're rewarding progress or encouraging progress, not just using the number as the number. And if you're not up that number at the certain time, then shame on you, which then leads into the feedback part. So from your experience, what are some of the, I guess, the nuances or the challenges around this? Because I'm suspecting that for a new sales leader in particular, all they've got to really hang their hat on is I've got to get this number. So my feedback is going to be geared around that number. Therefore, I've got to drive accountability to get that number. How do you help them sort of make it a little bit easier to transition in that respect?
Yeah. Well, I think being accountable to the numbers is actually very important,
Mm,
but obsessing about them above people is not great. And so I like to say people over results. Sorry, I say relationships over results always, because
yeah,
then the results will follow.
yeah,
But as a leader, you have to you create the conditions for people to win. You
yeah,
don't make the sales, you don't help them win, but you create the conditions for them to win. And so to help someone say, this is your goal, you have to coach them through it. Is that going to be more activity? Is that looking at their skill sets? Are there a couple tweaks? Where are their strengths?
mm,
That's something I could talk all day about strengths, but do you know the best way for people to achieve their results? Because new sales leaders will go, well, here's how I did it, just do it how I did it. And you're like, well, I'm not you. I can't do it that way. And
yeah,
and so
exactly.
it's like we think there's one mold of a salesperson.
Mm,
Um, but accountability to the forcing of it, the pressure behind it, I think pressure is good. Pressure is what helps. Sorry, stress is good, right? You stress your muscles, you get stronger.
mm,
There's part of building tolerance in different aspects. But if you force someone to do it, to check it off, be like, I hit the quarterly target and they didn't get better, you just forced them to do it. That's super control.
yeah,
Um, you're going to lose in the long run as a leader.
mm,
And I think accountability, where leaders can view it as a new leader, be like, well, I'm going to make them do it or they're going to get fired. It's like, that's not accountability. That's just torture.
very
You know?
motivational though, isn't it? Get your number
I
or you're
wonder
getting,
why
yeah.
everyone's leaving the team. I don't
Well,
know. I don't know.
I'm a
Yeah.
great leader. Why are people leaving me?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. I've had people leave me when I was a bad boss, so I feel that a little bit. But you learn, you learn or you don't, and
Yeah.
you're not in your role very much. But yeah, accountability is really hard. But I don't find it's usually not the forcing that's hard. It's even having the courage to have the conversation and stem it from, hey, I know that you are really good, and your numbers don't currently show it.
Yeah.
Is there something is like, what's going on? Is there something going on in your life that we don't know about that's impacting your performance?
Mm.
We assume we always know what's going on, but we don't know. And I think that keeping yourself curious, this curiosity is a word that keeps coming up. Stay curious about your team. Stay interested in them, keep your trust, keep the relationship, because the accountability will come. And it's so much easier as a leader when is their own personal accountability,
Yeah.
when you've connected their goals and their purpose to what they want to achieve. The team will achieve it, but they're
Mm.
not going to do it for you. They're going to do it for them.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's a big topic, curiosity. And I think leaders, when they, certainly in my experience, when they make the first leap into sales leadership, it's almost like they don't know what they don't know. And what they have around them are models to follow. And they see other sales leaders who perhaps don't necessarily have the best interests of the team at heart, or they're looking out for themselves, and they spend a lot of time not with their team, and they spend a lot of time forecasting and managing upwards. So it means that curiosity is probably not there. They might have some warped view of curiosity. So I'm really curious about my team, but I'm spending all my time talking to my sales directors or managing upwards to the
Uh-huh.
board. So I'm not visible. So one of the things I'd love you to sort of talk about before we kind of wrap it up is this concept of, as a sales leader, what sort of time should I be spending with my team? And the reason I talk about that is the visibility factor versus, hey, I've got to be work on strategy. You guys go and sell. I'm managing the expectations of the business. I'm doing all the internal stuff. You guys go and sell. So how important as a sales leader making that transition is to be visible, either to coach, to mentor, to provide feedback, to help them in front of their customers.
It's critical. It's super critical. I don't have a percentage of breakdown because I think that completely depends on the business and the industry and what's going on.
Sure.
But at a minimum, you need to be reaching out. You need to see your team once a day. So whether that be a virtual 10-minute huddle where everyone's got their cameras on, maybe their makeup's not done yet, maybe the hair is not done, maybe they're still wearing pajama bottoms, but you are seeing people for a quick check-in. They're
Yeah.
talking about their goals for the day. Minimum of one-on-one with every direct report a week. So
Yeah.
if you have 20 direct reports, you got too many direct reports, right?
That's right.
It's like you should be able, and these one-on-ones, sometimes on the short end, they're 15 minutes, but they really need to be 30 minutes to an hour.
Mm,
And those are different conversations. We could go into that, but you need to be spending time with people. You need to be asking about them and their lives. You need to be talking about goals that they have, developmental things, being prepared for meetings to add value,
mm.
right? Like we are so good at that in sales where we're like, focus every meeting, I'm going to provide value, right? And then you get into sales leadership and you're like, tell me what your problems are. Oh, okay. Where are your numbers? And it's like, where's the value?
Yeah.
Don't forget, bring that with you, bring that with you. But it's really important to those relationships. And if you can't get to everyone, people are listening to this, like, Rebecca, I'm on the road, I got trade shows, that's not possible. Then I would say you definitely need to figure out and talk to every person on what they need from you.
Mm.
Because if they say they don't need a weekly conversation with you, you still talk to them for 5 minutes,
Yeah.
right? There could be the experienced 60-year-old seller that wants nothing to do with their manager, right? They're like, I've been around let me just let them do their thing, but talk to them.
Yeah.
Let them know you care about them. You need to be spending that time with people.
Mm. And that's probably one of the biggest pieces of advice that I give new leaders, because as soon as they get into the leadership chair, there's all of these expectations that perhaps they didn't think they were going to get, that are placed upon them all of a sudden, that they think, oh, based on the hierarchy, they almost therefore prioritize their senior managers because they want things and they want these reports and they want you to attend these meetings or be their representative at certain things. I say you got to be really, really ruthless in the time. And it comes back to your time management conversation before. Spend time with the people that matter, and that's your team.
It is so interesting. The you're learning to manage down as a
Mm.
first time manager, right? You're managing up and across probably earlier.
Yeah.
You're right. Some new sales leaders get so obsessed about the next promotion and those relationships with which are very important. They really
Mm.
are. Um, but you need to be managing down, across, and up really well. And the leaders that can do that are the ones that find success and the ones that continue to elevate, rise up the ranks,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And be ruthless with that. And it comes back to the priority management stuff that if there's a choice between going into, and this might be a career limiting move, a senior executive meeting about your cadence or your forecasting, or spending time with the person that is maybe struggling a little bit in their role, but you know that the investment of that time is going to exponentially pay dividends, then it should be a relatively, it's easy for me to say, harder to do when you're in the heat of the moment, but
Uh-huh.
you need to know
Uh-huh.
where your priorities are going to be.
Yeah, it's really challenging to say no to higher ups.
Yeah,
And it's so easy to be like, I will switch a one-on-one with a direct report for the CEO.
yeah,
I'm kind of a timeline crazy woman. So if I have something on my calendar, like I actually just had this earlier, I had an executive team meeting and they wanted to switch. I'm like, I can't do it. I have a meeting and it's not really that an important of a meeting, but I really
yeah,
need to get to it. And
yeah,
it's part of my professional development as a consultant.
yeah,
And so I just said, I have a meeting and I could totally have canceled it.
yeah.
And the thing is that they don't want me to cancel that stuff either. And so
No,
I just held firm on the time. So sales leaders need to do the same thing because your schedule is not your own as a sales leader. So the time that you have to control, do your best to control it.
yeah,
And it's okay to tell someone no.
yeah.
Um, it's okay.
It
It's
is.
okay. Yeah.
As you say, it takes courage, particularly if there's a person who is more senior in the organization and the perceived authority they have. I can't say no to this person because what is it going to mean for me? Is it going to hamper my career progression, et cetera, et cetera? Well, no. Have a conversation because if they're a legitimate, decent leader, they're going to understand and they're going to say, hey, if they find out that you've actually cancelled something that you should have been at just to see them, they'll be thinking, what's going on? I don't have a great leader. I've got somebody who just is going to be told to follow
That's
instructions.
That's the thing. See, new sales leaders think that they're like getting ahead, but it just shows that they're out of control, that they can't
Totally.
manage it. And to your point, we make all these assumptions. What are they going to think of me? Ask them.
Mm,
Say, hey, senior director, here's the deal. I have a one-on-one and I'm learning how to manage my time through this. And I want to prioritize this because it's really important. But I also know that my role in this company is to coach and be there for our salespeople. And I have a critical person on the team who needs my help.
mm.
I'm going to lean towards that. Is that the right decision?
Yeah.
Just
Yep.
say it. Ask them. Be like, what's expected here of this role?
Exactly right.
While they might be annoyed, they're going to be like, wow,
That's what we
that
want.
is a high potential leader who knows how to
Anyway.
have a hard conversation, who's going to tell me the truth, because no one tells the higher ups the truth. They
No.
all kiss butt. You know what I mean? Like they're not
Yeah.
used, your senior leaders aren't used to someone being honest with them.
That's it.
So
That's
it's
it.
always a win-win. Yeah.
Totally. No, that's a great point. So look, I'm conscious of you've got a hard finish. So if we've got people listening to this right now who maybe haven't yet quite made the leap to sales leadership, but are thinking about it, things that, and we'll talk about where to get the book when it comes out, etc. If there was one thing that people could grasp hold of today that perhaps we haven't sort of talked about, but you can leave as a passing thought, as an emerging sales leader, to think of or to start to build the muscle around, what would that be?
I would say number one is start working really smart and
Hmm.
just go through what your strengths are. Look at the leaders at your organization or the company you're interviewing at, whatever it is. what makes sales leaders in that company successful? What are they doing? How do they think? What are their skills? And then take stock of that and focus on the ones that you have to build upon those.
Hmm.
That I would say would be the number one thing, is just to say what's going to hold me up in sales leadership. Why do I want to be a leader, and what do I need to be successful? I would say that would be a great place to start.
Brilliant. Love it. Great place to finish as well. So thank you so much for being a wonderful guest on the podcast. Now, Rebecca, people who are listening to this want to know a little bit more about you and to connect with you, but also think about, how do I get this book you've got coming out in September called Leaderboard to Leadership? Where's the best place for people to connect with you?
Well, they can go to our website, so riseupconsultinggroup.com. And when we have the pre-sale going, we'll have a link on there to purchase.
Hmm.
And then I am on LinkedIn. I love being on LinkedIn. I love creating relationships with people on there. And we're going to have freebies along with this book. So downloadable things like a culture worksheet, a weekly sales leader success planner, just several things to kind of help. So those resources will be on our website when it launches at the end of September.
Brilliant. Love it. I'll put all that in the show notes, and maybe closer to September as well, we might have to get you back on and talk a little bit more about some specific elements of the book. So Rebecca, thanks again for being a wonderful guest on the Exceptional Sales Leadership podcast, and all the best with the launch of the book.
Thank you. I've had a good time. Thanks for being a great host.
Thank you for listening to the Exceptional Sales Leader podcast. I trust the information in this episode has been helpful in your journey towards becoming exceptional. And remember, please take the time to rate the show, subscribe to the show so other people can find it. But also, if I can help you, jump on my calendar, go to leadwithdarren.com, and let's have a conversation about how I can help you along your journey to being exceptional.